Welcome to my audio short story channel. Today's story is Mr. Same. For years, Mr. Same has lived by his routine. One night, an angry storm sets into motion a series of events that interfere with his schedule and land him in the middle of unexpected circumstances he finds disturbing in a most interesting way. Enjoy the story. I'll see you at the end. And remember to tune in next week when I share insights about today's story. Enjoy. Mr. Same, a short story by Janet Keller Richards, copyright 2023, all rights reserved. I'd like to tell you about a day, not so long ago, that changed the life of a man named Mr. Same. It all started with a storm in the middle of the night. It was one of those raucous storms that intentionally aims its lightning bolts at towering skyscrapers because they have brazenly interfered with its sky space and set their steel and cement right in the middle of its tumultuous booming. Mr. Same lived on the 11th floor of one of those interfering skyscraping high-rises. But before I go any further and tell you about the events that were set into motion that night, it will be very helpful for you to know what Mr. Same's life was like before the angry storm turned his life upside down on its head and sent him into the disarray from which he never quite recovered. As his name indicates, Mr. Same was a man of routine. And since time was essential to carrying out an effective routine, once a week he adjusted all his clocks to be perfectly aligned with the atomic clocks that set the world's coordinated universal time. His daily schedule was tied to those precise clocks and began the moment his alarm sounded at 7:15 a.m. He always set 2 alarms because if one alarm failed, the second alarm would be sure to do its job of waking him at the precise moment his daily routine began. Mr. Same adhered to his schedule without fail, which was as follows. At 7:15 his alarm sounded and he rose and made his bed. From 7:16 to 7:40 he drank coffee and ate 2 pieces of buttered wheat toast. At 7:40, he showered, put on his boxers and wristwatch, shaved, cleaned his fingernails, combed his hair, and tidied the bathroom counter. Precisely at 8:10, he walked to his closet, which was arranged in the following order. 14 pairs of identical dark blue slacks hung to the left of 14 identical plain light blue shirts. On the floor below the slacks and shirts were 3 identical pairs of black loafers. To their right was a small drawer holding 14 identical pairs of navy blue socks. Mr. Same grabbed one of each item or pair and dressed himself. At 8:15, he retrieved his shoulder bag from the hook by the bedroom door and slung it over a shoulder. He then stepped out of his apartment, locked the door, and walked to the elevator. By 8:18, Mr. Same was greeting Mr. Angelini, the doorman in the lobby, with "Good morning" and a nod, to which Mr. Angelini replied, "Good morning, Mr. Same." From 8:18 to 8:45, Mr. Same walked the 4 long city blocks between his apartment high-rise and the office building where he worked as a senior accountant for a large corporation. At 8:50, Mr. Same rode the elevator to the 40th floor and walked toward his small office. By 8:55, he was grabbing a cup of water from the water cooler, and by 8:56, Mr. Same was sitting in his chair at his desk, ready to begin his work for the day. This was the weekday morning schedule Mr. Same carried out day after day, year after year, until the night of the storm. On that consequential Thursday night, as usual, Mr. Same went to bed at 11 o'clock. Before turning off the light, he set the alarm clock on his nightstand for 7:15 a.m. He also set the alarm on his cell phone and placed it next to his alarm clock. Then he plumped his pillow and lay down to sleep. Around 3:30 in the morning, lightning and thunder roared and crashed in the sky overhead, and a howling wind blew pelting rain against the windows of Mr. Same's high-rise apartment. But since he was in the middle of a vivid science fiction dream about his heroic rescue of distressed Earthlings on a colonized planet, the thunderous sounds of the storm became to him explosions occurring inside his dream. That's the reason Mr. Same kept on dreaming right through the storm's clamorous weather assault. But the tempest had accomplished its mission, which was to knock out the skyscraper's electricity for several hours in order to show the building who was in charge. The unfortunate effect of the storm's victory was that Mr. Same's alarm clock malfunctioned. And it just so happened that Mr. Same had accidentally set the secondary alarm on his cell phone for 7:15 p.m. rather than 7:15 a.m. So when he woke up to silence and looked at his blinking clock and then at his cell phone and saw that it was 7:59, he sprang up from his bed muttering, "Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!" He paced in circles and ran his hands through his hair until he was able to get a hold of himself. He began to calculate. In order to get to work on time, he would need to cut out 45 minutes of his morning routine. He decided the first adjustment would be to forego taking a shower. He said to himself, "I'll use extra deodorant and splash on cologne." The idea for the second adjustment followed immediately on the heels of the first, and he added, "And instead of eating breakfast, I can stop at the convenience store and grab a cup of coffee." Mr. Same was satisfied that with these two changes in his routine, he could still arrive at work in his punctual fashion. His muscles relaxed, and he walked purposefully to the bathroom to shave and run a comb through his hair. By 8:15 he had dressed, put on his socks and shoes, grabbed his shoulder bag, and rushed out the door. Except for the 2 minutes he still had to make up in order to be able to stop at the convenience store for coffee, Mr. Same was back on schedule. Descending in the elevator at his usual time, he headed outside and said, "Good morning," to Mr. Angelini, who responded with, "Good morning, Mr. Same. That was quite a storm last night, wasn't it?" Mr. Same turned and looked quizzically at the doorman. "There was a storm?" "Oh, yes," Mr. Angelini said with enthusiasm. "It knocked out our building's power for more than 3 hours." Mr. Same now understood why the alarm clock malfunctioned. But not wanting to delay any longer, he nodded and continued on his way as the doorman called after him, "Have a good day!" Mr. Same increased his pace, and by the end of the second block he had gained an entire minute. At the beginning of the third block, he quickly stopped at the newsstand to purchase his daily newspaper and hurried on, passing by the barber shop, where every fourth Saturday of the month Mr. Garcia cut his hair, by Long's Deli and Fruit Emporium, where every Saturday morning he purchased 7 ready-made entrees for the following week, by the pet shop, which usually had fluffy little kittens playing in its window, by the bookstore, where he regularly perused the science fiction section, by the designer coffee shop that sold fancy drinks like macchiatos and cappuccinos, a shop practical Mr. Same had never once frequented in his 17 years of living in the high-rise building that angered the storm. When he arrived at the end of the third block, the walk light was in his favor, and he was able to cross the street to the fourth block without any delay. He looked at his watch and smiled. He was now 2 minutes early, which was exactly the length of time it would take to purchase his coffee. Mr. Same entered the convenience store located at the beginning of the fourth block, walked to the back of the store where the coffee pots were located, poured himself a large French roast coffee, and put a lid on his cup. When he turned around to head to the cashier, he smacked right into a woman moving toward the coffee bar. The lid of his coffee cup came off, and his coffee spilled all over his shirt and pants, and all over the woman with whom he had collided. He looked down at his shirt and pants and said, "Oh, no! Oh, no! Oh, no!" The woman was saying her own less presentable words and grabbing a slew of napkins to begin cleaning off the coffee from her clothing. Mr. Same apologized to the woman, who also apologized to him. He threw the empty coffee cup in the trash. There was no time to grab another cup of coffee, so he went to the cash register to pay for the cup he'd spilled. But the young man behind the counter looked at his clothing and said there would be no charge. Outside, Mr. Same stood still, feeling entirely conflicted. He couldn't go to work looking as he did, but there was no time to return to his apartment and change. Then a spark of hope lit up his ordered mind as he thought of Smith & Co. Men's Apparel, the store where he purchased all of his clothing. It was next to his office building, and though he knew it only opened at 9 o'clock, on his morning walks he'd often seen the store lights on prior to opening time and Mr. Smith standing inside preparing for the day. He looked at his watch. It was 8:48. Rushing down the sidewalk, he arrived at the front door of the shop and peered inside. The lights were on, and Mr. Smith was standing behind the counter. He banged on the door. As Mr. Smith walked toward him, there was a look of recognition on the store owner's face. Mr. Same gestured to the brown coffee stains covering his clothing. He said loudly, in order to be heard through the thick glass of the door, "I need to buy a shirt and pants." Mr. Smith unlocked the door and invited him to enter. "Thank you," said Mr. Same as he made a beeline toward the rack where his plain blue shirts were located. Everything in Mr. Smith's store was arranged by color. All the blue shirts hung in one section, all the white shirts hung in another, and so on. As Mr. Same hurried toward the blue shirts, Mr. Smith followed after him and said apologetically, "Mr. Same, I am sorry to say that we received an incorrect shipment of shirts, and at the present time we're out of your shirts, but they will be arriving by the end of this week." Mr. Same stood in front of the blue shirts and pulled one off the rack. It was a Hawaiian-style shirt filled with images of palm leaves and pineapples and flowers. "Oh, no, this will never do," he said. "This will never do." "I do apologize, Mr. Same," Mr. Smith said sincerely, "but if I may say so, that is quite a lively shirt, and it will look stylish on you." Mr. Same looked at his watch. It was now 8:52, the time when he should be in his office building's elevator on the way up to his office. He took the shirt and grabbed the nearest pair of slacks in his size, which happened to be tan and not navy blue, and dashed into the dressing room. 2 minutes later, at 8:54, he paid for the new outfit he was wearing and ran out the door carrying his coffee-stained garments in a bag. He entered his office building and raced toward the lobby elevators, where a car was filling with people. One of the women in the elevator saw him running and reached out an arm to hold the door open for him. As Mr. Same entered the car, he looked at his watch and realized the kind lady's gesture had allowed him to make up the few minutes it normally took to wait for an elevator. He would still make it to work on time. As the elevator began to climb, the kind woman turned her head, looked at him with an appreciative smile, and said, "That's a nice shirt." Mr. Same glanced her way and asked with disbelief, "Are you talking to me?" "Yes, I really like that shirt," she reiterated. No one had ever noticed his attire before, let alone complimented him for it. He smiled and thanked her and looked down at his Hawaiian print. It certainly was bold. He exited the elevator on the 40th floor at 8:58 and stopped quickly at the water cooler to grab a cup of water. Matthew, the accounting department's young college intern, walked by and said, "Good morning, Mr. Same. I love your shirt. Nice choice." "Thank you," answered Mr. Same. Smiling, he straightened up, pulled back his shoulders, and walked to his small office to settle in for the day. All day long he was complimented. At the cafeteria, at meetings, and even in the bathroom, people admired Mr. Same's shirt. Several of his co-workers said it made him look quite handsome, and a few people followed up their remarks on his shirt by telling him about their weekend plans. One person asked him about his family. Rather than ignoring him as they usually did, people seemed to see him. He found the change disturbing in a most interesting way. At the end of the day, he wrapped up his work, picked up his bag of stained clothing, and headed down the elevator and out of the building. As he passed by Smith & Co. Men's Apparel, Mr. Same slowed his pace and considered buying a second blue Hawaiian shirt. But instead, he chose to continue on his way and stay within the confines of his routine. The next morning was Friday, and Mr. Same wore his usual light blue shirt and dark blue pants. Though there were smiles from those with whom he had spoken the day before, as a whole, interactions with his co-workers returned to discussions about accounting procedures and the duties of the day. As disconcerting as the friendliness of the people had been the day before, Mr. Same found himself experiencing an emotion he hadn't previously felt. He was lonely. He decided the answer was to press more fervently into his routine. Focusing intently, he poured himself into his paperwork and his computer and his meetings. At the end of the workday, he slung his shoulder bag over one shoulder and returned home, continuing to adhere closely to his schedule. The next day was Saturday. Mr. Same dressed in his usual clothing and made his scheduled shopping excursions. His first stop was the dry cleaner, where he dropped off 7 pairs of dark blue pants and 8 blue shirts, which included his newly acquired Hawaiian shirt. Then he headed to Long's Deli and Fruit Emporium and purchased his usual entrees and 7 days' worth of fruits and vegetables. Everyone he interacted with was polite and cordial in their usual way, but no one struck up any conversations or added any additional thoughts to their "good morning" or to their "thank you." Mr. Same's Saturday routine proceeded without any variance, and at 11 o'clock he lay down on his bed, fluffed his pillow, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. At 3:30 a.m., he was awakened by a fierce crack of thunder and by lightning bolts that blazed across the sky in quick succession. He opened his eyes and lay still, listening to the storm's antics. His thoughts wandered to the previous storm, the one that had caused his alarm clock to malfunction. He realized if it hadn't been for that storm, he never would have stopped for coffee, and he wouldn't have bought a Hawaiian shirt, and there would have been no compliments that resulted in personable conversations. He had the storm to thank for the unsettling anomalies he had experienced. As he carried out his routine for the remainder of the weekend, Mr. Same began formulating a plan. And on Monday after work at 5:35, he entered Smith & Co. Men's Apparel and made a beeline to the blue rack of shirts. Grabbing a blue Hawaiian shirt in his size, he walked toward the register to pay for it. But before he got that far, he noticed there were Hawaiian shirts on the orange shirt rack to his left. As he glanced around the store, he saw Hawaiian shirts in every color on every rack of shirts. Spontaneously, he grabbed an orange Hawaiian shirt and a yellow Hawaiian shirt and paid for all 3 shirts. Another storm erupted in the morning on Tuesday. Mr. Same lay awake listening to it, feeling both excited and nervous about his formulated plan. As the storm subsided, he finally fell asleep again. In the morning, he exited the elevator of his building and walked across the lobby, where Mr. Angelini greeted him with, "Well, good morning, Mr. Same, and I must say you're looking quite dashing this morning." Mr. Same smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Angelini," he said, and continued on his way. As he caught the elevator in his office building, he happened to be standing beside the same woman who had previously admired his blue Hawaiian shirt. She eyed his current shirt and said with a laugh, "Good morning. Thanks for brightening our days." Mr. Same smiled and responded with, "You're welcome. It's the least I could do." As he exited the elevator on the 44th floor, the woman said to him, "Have a great day." He turned back and smiled, "And you do the same." Matthew, the college intern, loved his shirt, as did the rest of his co-workers. There were several compliments that started new conversations. Mr. Same discovered one of his co-workers was getting married over the coming weekend. He decided to buy a wedding present and put it on that co-worker's desk. When another colleague complimented his shirt, it led to a discussion about Hawaii as a vacation destination. His colleague then shared excitedly that she and her husband would soon be fulfilling their lifelong dream of spending 2 weeks in Hawaii. Mr. Same left work at 5:30 and couldn't stop smiling. His day had been delightful. When he walked by the cafe, he glanced at his reflection in its large windows. He'd been told he looked rather striking in his orange Hawaiian shirt. He had to agree, it did bring out his best qualities. As he walked by the pet store, Mr. Same's eyes were drawn to the lively creatures moving in its display window. They weren't the usual kittens. They were puppies with dark brown eyes and wagging little tails. While he paused for just a moment to watch them, one stood on its hind legs, put its paws up on the edge of the container, and with its tiny mouth hanging open and its little pink tongue sticking out, it looked up at him and smiled. Mr. Same was sure it was a smile, and he was also certain the smile was directed at him. He glanced at his watch. If he went into the pet store just to look at the puppies, he would add several minutes to his walk home. But then, he reasoned, he could forego the 15 minutes he usually spent relaxing on the sofa before heating up his entree, and he would be back on schedule. That was enough to cause Mr. Same to open the door and enter the pet store. 15 minutes later, he exited the store carrying a puppy in a crate in one hand and a book on how to train puppies in the other hand. He was smiling even more widely than before, and he was positive his newly acquired puppy was also smiling at the thought of sharing an apartment together. Mr. Same walked as briskly as he could while carrying an energetic puppy. He arrived at his apartment building just as the doorman was about to go off the clock for the evening. When Mr. Angelini saw his orange Hawaiian shirt, his countenance brightened and he said, "Mr. Same, you really do look sensational." Then he bent down and looked into the crate and asked, "And what do we have here?" Mr. Same said, "It's a puppy, a Yorkshire Terrier." Mr. Angelini promptly straightened up and said, "You don't say! My wife and I have a Yorkie. They are the most delightful breed of dog, Mr. Same. You'll be glad you chose this adorable little pup. May I see him?" Mr. Same was very aware his evening schedule was now off track, but Mr. Angelini's eyes were so in earnest he found it hard to say no. So he put the crate down and opened it, and the little puppy wandered out and came straight to him. It didn't go to Mr. Angelini, but to him, as if it knew it belonged to him. Mr. Same picked up the little pup and gently handed it to the doorman. "What an adorable little guy you are," Mr. Angelini said softly, and then asked Mr. Same, "Have you chosen a name yet?" A name! Mr. Same hadn't considered that he would have the responsibility of naming the little creature. A sense of importance washed over him, and he said, Not yet. I just purchased him at the pet store. Well, Mr. Angelini said, I am certain a name will come to you that will fit him perfectly. My wife and I named our Yorkie Rosie. Then he looked at Mr. Same and asked, And what will you do with him while you're at work? At hearing the doorman's question, mild panic struck Mr. Same. He had no idea how he would care for his puppy during the day when he was at work. He began to blush because it was quite uncharacteristic of him not to have a plan. Looking at the doorman, he said with wide eyes and a red face, I hadn't considered what I'll do. Mr. Angelini looked down at the pup cradled in his arms and said, Oh, don't you worry. When my wife sees this little ball of cuteness, I'm positive she will be more than willing to care for him while you're at work. And our Yorkie and your Yorkie can get to know each other. The doorman looked up and winked at Mr. Same and added, Who knows? In time we might become doggy in-laws. Mr. Same's eyes grew very large at that suggestion, and he blushed again. It was obvious to him that his decision to buy a dog had been impetuous. In addition, his evening schedule was now entirely in ruins and would be impossible to repair. He rubbed his forehead with a hand, castigated himself for such impulsive behavior, and considered returning the puppy to the pet store. Mr. Angelini looked at him and said, Say, would you and your new puppy like to come for dinner tonight and meet my wife and our Rosie? Mr. Same blinked and gaped at the doorman, who was eyeing him eagerly. His last dinner invitation had been almost a year ago, on August 23rd. He remembered the exact date because, even though he had refused it for the sake of keeping to his routine, being invited to dinner was an uncommon and significant event. He was about to turn down this invitation for the sake of his routine, but at that moment a thought occurred to him that had never before entered his mind. What if he threw out his routine and allowed his evening to just unfold? After all, if he was now responsible for naming a creature and caring for it, he could also be responsible for determining whether or not he stuck to his routine. He could choose. So he did. Yes, Mr. Angelini, I would love to come for dinner. Fabulous, said the doorman. I'll talk to my wife and we'll plan to see you in an hour. As he carefully handed the puppy back to Mr. Same, Mr. Angelini nodded toward it and said, And be sure to bring the little one so he can meet the family. As the two men walked together toward the elevator, Mr. Same asked Mr. Angelini thoughtfully, What do you think about the name Brewster? Mr. Angelini clapped him on the back and said approvingly, It's perfect! Mr. Same looked down at his little Brewster, who was looking up at him with his pink tongue sticking out in a smile, as if to say he approved wholeheartedly of his new name. That was how Mr. Same became grateful for the angry storm that knocked out the building's power and changed his life. He now enjoys walks in the park with Brewster and Friday night dinners with his new surrogate family, Robert and Mary and Rosie Angelini. He also wears a wide variety of colorful Hawaiian shirts and is getting to know his coworkers. He and Julia, the woman from the elevator, are about to go on their third date, which is quite a departure from his previous life. And though he is still organized, Mr. Same no longer lives by his routine. He lives by his heart, and he is no longer lonely. He's happy. I know, because I am that happy man. Thank you so much for listening. I trust you enjoyed this story. Of course, I'm always interested in what you have to say about it, so please leave a comment below. And join me next week when I share about today's story, where the idea came from, how it applies to life, and how it builds hope, etc. Also, in the description below, you will find a link to the written form of today's story, as well as information about my allegorical novel and other books I've written. And finally, as you can imagine, it does take time to write, edit, and record these stories. If you enjoy them, please consider supporting their creation with a one-time thanks. I will see you next week, and until then, I hope you have a great week.